Everyone always says you should trust your gut, but they never tell you what to do when your gut is screaming at you and you're just too terrified to listen. I guess looking back, the signs weren't even subtle. They were flashing neon lights in an empty desert. But I was so busy trying to be the good guy, the supportive husband, and the loyal best friend that I practically blindfolded myself. My name's Mark. 6 months ago, I thought I had the textbook definition of a quiet, comfortable suburban life. I'm 32, I work as a project manager for a commercial logistics firm in Charlotte, and I had been married to Chloe for 4 years. Chloe was the kind of woman who lit up a room without even trying. She was a graphic designer, artistic, sharp-witted, and possessed this effortless charm that always made me feel like I'd punched way above my weight class just by getting her to say I do. We owned a 3-bedroom house with a small backyard, a golden retriever named Tucker, and a mortgage that was stressful but manageable. It was a good life. It was a safe life. Then came Julian. Julian had been my closest friend since our freshman year at Ohio State. If I was the anchor, steady, predictable, maybe a little boring, Julian was the kite. He was always chasing the next big thing, moving from city to city, launching startups that burned out in 6 months, and living off a cocktail of sheer charisma and borrowed money. But he was my brother. When my dad passed away during my senior year, Julian was the one who sat on the floor of my dorm room with a bottle of cheap whiskey, making sure I didn't completely fall apart. You don't forget things like that. You don't turn your back on that kind of loyalty, even when the person starts sliding off the rails. Around last November, Julian hit rock bottom. A tech venture he'd poured all his remaining cash into in Austin collapsed, leaving him broke, evicted, and sleeping in his Honda Civic. When he called me from a rest stop somewhere in Georgia, his voice sounded thinner than I'd ever heard it. He wasn't asking for a handout. He was just broken. I didn't even hesitate. I looked at Chloe across the kitchen island, told her the situation, and said, I want to let him stay on our couch for a few weeks until he gets on his feet. Chloe wasn't thrilled at first. She liked her space, and Julian could be a lot to handle. But she knew what he meant to me. She sighed, rubbed my shoulder, and said, if it were my best friend, you'd do the same for me. Tell him he can come. I felt this massive wave of relief and gratitude. I felt like the luckiest man alive because I had a wife who understood the meaning of sacrifice and a friend I could finally help after all these years. When Julian pulled into our driveway 2 days later, looking exhausted with his life packed into 3 duffel bags, I gave him a massive bear hug. Just a few weeks, man, Julian said, his eyes bloodshot as he looked around our living room. I promise I won't get in the way. I'll be out of your hair before you know it. Take your time, I told him, throwing an arm around his shoulder. Mi casa es su casa. God, I wish I could go back and punch myself in the face for saying that. The first couple of weeks were fine. Julian kept to himself, spending hours on his laptop at the dining table applying for remote consulting gigs. He was incredibly polite, always washing his own dishes, offering to take Tucker for walks, and making himself scarce when Chloe and I wanted to watch a movie in the evenings. But gradually, the dynamic began to shift, in that slow, imperceptible way that water wears down a rock. Julian got a contract job. It wasn't full-time, but it paid well enough for him to start contributing to groceries and buying nicer clothes. With the money came his old confidence. He started joining us for dinner instead of eating in his room. He'd pour glasses of wine, tell hilarious, self-deprecating stories about his failures in Austin, and make Chloe laugh, really laugh. The kind of deep, uninhibited laugh that I hadn't heard from her in a long time because I was always stressed about quarterly budget reviews or the leak in our roof. I initially thought it was great. I loved seeing my 2 favorite people getting along. I remember sitting on the patio one Friday night, watching Chloe and Julian argue playfully about some indie band, thinking about how perfect my world felt. I was proud that I had been able to save my friend, and I was proud of the home Chloe and I had built. But then, the atmosphere in the house changed. It became charged with an energy I couldn't quite define. It started with little things. I'd walk into the kitchen and their conversation would abruptly stop, shifting into a casual, over-explained topic. Chloe started dressing up a bit more, even on days when she was just working from her home office. She stopped wearing her oversized college t-shirts and started wearing silk camisoles and putting on light makeup before going downstairs for breakfast.
When I joked about it, she just rolled her eyes and said she was trying to feel more professional to boost her productivity. Then there were the glances. I caught Julian looking at her when she walked out of the room, his eyes tracing the line of her back with an intensity that made the hairs on my arms stand up. When I looked at him, he'd instantly blink, look at me, and flash that trademark easygoing smile. "Man, Chloe really killed it with that dinner," he'd say, deflecting seamlessly. And I, because I wanted to believe in the goodness of the people I loved, pushed the toxic thoughts down. I told myself I was being insecure. I told myself that Julian was just grateful, and Chloe was just being a good hostess.
By March, Julian had been with us for 4 months. The few weeks had stretched out, and whenever I brought up the idea of him finding his own apartment, Chloe would defend him. "The housing market is brutal right now, Mark," she'd say, brushing her hair in the vanity mirror. "Why force him to waste money on a crappy lease when he's finally saving up? He's not hurting anyone." "He's occupying our living space, Chloe," I argued gently, sitting on the edge of our bed. "It's been 4 months. We haven't had an intimate night alone without worrying about someone hearing us through the drywall." She didn't look at me. She just kept brushing her hair, her movements slightly rigid. "I think you're being selfish. He's your best friend." That comment stung. It made me feel small, ungenerous, and bitter. So I dropped it. I went to work, buried my head in spreadsheets, and tried to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday in mid-April. My company was handling a major distribution transition for a client in Greensboro, about an hour and a half away. I was scheduled to oversee the late shift implementation, meaning I wouldn't be leaving the facility until at least midnight. I called Chloe around 6 p.m. to let her know. "Hey, babe," I said, leaning against the vending machine in the break room. "Just checking in. The rollout is running a little behind, so I probably won't be home until around 1:30 or 2 a.m. Don't wait up for me." "Oh, okay," Chloe said. Her voice sounded slightly muffled, like she was holding the phone away from her face. There was a brief pause, a faint rustle of clothing, and then she spoke quicker. "That's fine. Julian and I were just about to order some Thai food. Take your time. Don't rush on the highway. It's pouring down out here." "Yeah, it's raining hard here too. Love you," I said. "Love you too," she whispered, and the line went dead. She hadn't asked how my day was. She hadn't complained about the weather like she usually did. Her voice had this strange, breathless cadence that lingered in my ears long after I hung up. I stood there, staring at my phone, the knot in my stomach suddenly tightening into a hard, cold rock. By 9:30 p.m., the client's tech team managed to resolve the software glitch ahead of schedule. The site manager patted my back and told me they could handle the rest of the physical inventory check. I was free to go. Under normal circumstances, I would have texted Chloe immediately to tell her the good news, that I was coming home early. But as I walked out to my truck in the dark, pouring rain, a dark, suffocating instinct stopped my thumb from hitting the send button. My heart was hammering against my ribs for absolutely no logical reason. I told myself I was crazy. I told myself I was being a paranoid, toxic husband. But the silence from my phone, the memory of her breathless voice, and the 4 months of subtle shifts in my own home compiled into a heavy, undeniable weight. I put the truck in drive and started the 90-minute commute back to Charlotte in total silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the rhythmic, hypnotic slap of the windshield wipers against the glass. The drive felt like an eternity. Every headlight passing me in the opposite direction felt like a warning. By the time I pulled into our neighborhood, it was just past 11:15 p.m. The suburban streets were completely dark, lined with identical houses with their porch lights on. As I turned down our cul-de-sac, I turned off my truck's headlights, coasting the last 100 yards on pure momentum before pulling up to the curb a few houses down from my own. I sat in the dark cabin of my truck, staring at my house. The downstairs lights were completely off. The driveway was empty except for Julian's Honda Civic, parked right where it always was. Upstairs, in our master bedroom, the light was on, casting a soft, warm glow through the sheer curtains. My hands were shaking as I pulled the key out of the ignition. I didn't want to go inside. A part of me, the cowardly part that wanted to preserve the illusion of my happy life, begged me to just turn the key, drive to a diner, and come back at 2 a.m. like I was supposed to. But the anger, raw and volatile, took over. I got out of the truck, closing the door with a soft, quiet click. I didn't use the umbrella in my back seat. I walked up the driveway in the pouring rain, the cold water soaking through my jacket, but I couldn't feel it.
I reached the front door, carefully slipped my key into the deadbolt, and turned it with agonizing slowness. The lock clicked open. I stepped into the foyer, gently closing the door behind me. The house smelled faintly of lemongrass and coconut curry, the Thai food they had ordered. Tucker, our dog, didn't bark. He just trotted over from his bed in the living room, his tail thumping softly against the rug. I patted his head, gesturing for him to stay, and slipped off my wet boots. The house was deathly quiet, except for the sound of the rain drumming against the roof and the faint, rhythmic creaking of the floorboards directly above me. I walked toward the stairs, every muscle in my body locking up. My breathing was shallow. I took the stairs one by one, keeping my weight on the outer edges of the wood to prevent them from creaking. With every step I climbed, the sounds from upstairs became clearer. It wasn't the sound of a television. It wasn't the sound of someone reading or working. It was a low, muffled laugh. A man's laugh, followed by a soft, familiar sigh that I had heard 1,000 times over the last 4 years. I reached the top of the landing. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the line of light cutting across the carpet from the bottom of our half-open bedroom door. I walked toward it like a man walking toward a firing squad. My hand reached out, my fingers trembling violently as they touched the cool brass of the doorknob. I pushed the door open. The door swung open without a sound, and for a fraction of a second, my brain flatly refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The mind has this defensive mechanism, this desperate, frantic instinct to protect you from a trauma so massive it threatens to break your reality. I thought I was looking at strangers. I thought I had walked into the wrong house, but it was my house. It was my bed. Julian was sitting up against the headboard, the gray linen sheets we had bought together for our anniversary draped loosely over his waist. Chloe was sitting sideways across his lap, her head buried in the crook of his neck, her fingers intertwined with his hair. She was laughing at something he had just whispered, that soft, breathless laugh I had caught over the phone hours earlier. They looked completely at ease. They looked like a couple who had been together for a decade, completely comfortable in their shared intimacy, completely devoid of any fear of being caught, because to them, I was 90 miles away, safely trapped in a warehouse until 2 a.m. Then Julian looked up. His eyes met mine through the dim, warm light of the bedside lamp. The easy, confident smile on his face vanished so fast, it looked like it had been violently slapped off. His entire body went rigid underneath her. Chloe felt the sudden tension in his muscles, her laughter cutting off mid-breath. "Julian, what's wrong?" she murmured, turning her head to follow his frozen gaze. When her eyes landed on me, standing in the doorway, drenched in rain, her face drained of color so fast she looked like a ghost. She let out a sharp, choked gasp, scrambling backward off him so violently she nearly tripped over the edge of the mattress, pulling the sheet tightly against her chest. Nobody spoke. The only sound in the room was the heavy, rhythmic drumming of the rain against the window pane and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I felt entirely disconnected from my body, like I was floating near the ceiling, watching this pathetic, broken man named Mark stand in a soaked jacket while his world evaporated into thin air. "Mark," Chloe finally choked out, her voice trembling so hard it barely carried across the room. "Mark, oh my God, you're home early." It was such a fundamentally stupid thing to say. A primal, suffocating wave of white-hot rage flared up in my chest, breaking through the initial shock. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. My voice came out as a low, hollow hiss that sounded completely foreign to my own ears. "Is that all you have to say?" Julian finally found his voice, raising his hands in a defensive gesture as he slowly slid out of the bed, reaching for his boxers on the floor. "Man, Mark, look, listen to me. We didn't mean to." "Shut up, Julian," I said. The words were quiet, but they cut through the room like a razor blade. He stopped mid-sentence, his jaw snapping shut, his eyes darting toward the door, as if measuring his chances of pushing past me. He looked pathetic. The smooth, charismatic guy who always had a story and a quick recovery was completely gone, replaced by a trembling coward catching his breath in my bedroom. Chloe was sobbing now, the tears streaming down her face, ruining the light makeup she had put on just for him. "Mark, please, let us explain. It was an accident. It just happened. We were lonely and everything was so stressful and—" "An accident?" I stepped fully into the room, and both of them flinched back as if I had pulled a weapon. I pointed a shaking finger at the bed, at the empty plates of Thai food sitting on my nightstand, at the casual, sickening domesticity of it all. You've been sleeping with him in my bed while I was out working to pay the mortgage on this house? The house he's living in for free because I wanted to save him? No, Mark, it wasn't like that, Chloe cried, reaching a hand out toward me, but she wouldn't dare step closer. Please, just sit down. Let's talk about this. We can fix this. Fix this? I looked at her, really looked at her, and the agonizing truth settled into my bones. The woman I had loved, the woman I had promised to protect and grow old with, didn't exist.
She was a stranger who had looked me in the eye every morning, kissed me goodbye, and then welcomed my best friend into our sheets the moment my car pulled out of the driveway. There is nothing to fix. I turned my gaze to Jillian. He couldn't even look me in the eye anymore. He was staring at the hardwood floor, his shoulders slouched. This was the guy I called a brother. This was the guy I sat on a dorm room floor with, crying over my dead father. I had given him shelter when he had nothing, and in return, he had systematically dismantled my life from the inside out. Get out, I said, my voice dangerously steady. Mark, come on, let's just go downstairs and Julian started, taking a cautious step forward. Get out of my house right now, Julian, I repeated, my voice rising just enough to make him freeze. If you are not out of this house in 5 minutes, I swear to God I will personally throw everything you own into the street and call the police. Move. He didn't argue further. He grabbed his jeans and a t-shirt from the chair, rushing past me into the hallway, keeping his back pressed against the wall as if he thought I was going to strike him. I didn't. He wasn't worth the energy. Chloe stood by the bed, clutching the sheet around herself, her shoulders shaking violently as she wept. Mark, please don't do this. Don't throw him out in the rain. Don't do this to us. To us? I let out a dry, bitter laugh that felt like tearing glass in my throat.
There is no us anymore, Chloe. You made sure of that. I didn't stay to watch her cry. I turned around, walked down the stairs, and sat on the bottom step, staring at the front door. A few minutes later, Julian came running down the stairs, clutching his 3 duffel bags, his shoes half on. He didn't look at me as he scrambled out the front door into the pouring rain. A moment later, I heard his Honda Civic crank to life, the tire screeching slightly as he backed out of the driveway and sped away into the darkness. Chloe came down the stairs slowly, having thrown on a heavy fleece robe. She sat on the stairs a few steps above me, keeping her distance, her knees drawn up to her chest. I'm sorry, she whispered into the silence. I'm so sorry, Mark. How long? I asked, not turning around to face her. She didn't answer right away. I could hear her swallowing hard, trying to catch her breath. 2 months, she finally confessed. It started about 2 months ago. 2 months. For 60 days, I had been living in a house of mirrors. For 60 days, they had been sharing secret smiles, touching under the dinner table, waiting for me to leave for work so they could be together. Every time she told me I was being paranoid, every time she called me selfish for wanting our privacy back, she was actively protecting her affair. The betrayal didn't just feel like a broken heart, it felt like a total rewriting of my past. Every memory I had from the last 2 months was retroactively poisoned. I want you to leave too, I said quietly, staring at the umbrella stand by the door. Mark, this is my house too, she said, a sudden edge of desperation returning to her voice. Where am I supposed to go at midnight? I don't care, I said, and for the first time I meant it. The profound empathy I usually felt for her was completely dead, replaced by a cold, hollow void. Go to a hotel. Go find Julian. I don't care where you go, Chloe, but if you sleep in this house tonight, I won't be responsible for the absolute hell I will make your life tomorrow. Just leave. She realized then that there was no negotiating. The gentle, accommodating husband she knew was gone. She went back upstairs, and 15 minutes later she walked down carrying a suitcase. She didn't say goodbye. She walked out the front door, the lock clicking shut behind her, leaving me completely alone in the silent, empty house. I sat on that step until the sun came up, watching the shadows shift across the living room walls. Tucker came over and rested his heavy head on my knee, and I finally let the tears fall, sobbing silently into his fur until my chest ached. The next few weeks were a blur of cold, clinical reality.
I hired a divorce attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, who made it very clear that North Carolina law didn't care about my broken heart. It cared about assets.
Because Chloe's graphic design business was struggling and my income was steady, Sarah warned me that a messy, drawn-out legal battle could end up costing me a fortune in alimony and legal fees, regardless of her infidelity. Chloe didn't fight me at first. She was staying with her sister in Raleigh, completely cut off from our mutual friends who had all taken my side once the truth inevitably leaked out. But then the narrative shifted. A month into the separation, I received a formal legal response from her new attorney. She wasn't just asking for half the equity in the house, she was demanding alimony, claiming that she had sacrificed her career growth to support my corporate trajectory. It was a lie, a calculated legal maneuver, but it worked. To avoid a multi-year court battle that would completely bankrupt me, Sarah advised me to settle. I had to sell the house. Watching the moving truck pull away with the furniture we chose together, leaving behind an empty structure that used to be my sanctuary, felt like a second execution. After the mortgage was cleared and the legal fees were paid, I was left with a fraction of my savings. I moved into a cramped, depressing one-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city, where the sound of the highway kept me awake until dawn. I was broke, exhausted, and emotionally hollowed out. Chloe, meanwhile, didn't look back. Through the grapevine of a few remaining acquaintances, I learned that she and Julian had officially moved into a luxury high-rise apartment uptown. Julian had somehow landed a massive venture capital investment for a new logistics software company, ironically utilizing concepts and industry pain points I had casually complained about at the dinner table while he was living on my couch. He was rich now. She was thriving. The cheaters hadn't just gotten away with it, they had won. 14 months passed. I threw myself into my work, getting promoted to senior regional director, solely because I had nothing else to live for. I saved every penny, lived like a monk, and slowly began to rebuild my financial foundation, though my soul remained tightly locked away in a dark room. Then, yesterday morning, a thick, heavy, cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. There was no return address, just my name written in Chloe's distinct, elegant calligraphy. My hands grew cold as I tore it open. Inside was a heavy cardstock invitation, embossed with silver foil lettering. Together with their families, Chloe Evans and Julian Vance invite you to celebrate their wedding. Attached to the invitation was a small, handwritten sticky note in Chloe's handwriting. It read, "Mark, I know this is strange, but I want you there. I need you to see that we didn't do this to hurt you, but because it was destiny. Please show me you've moved on. Please give us your blessing." I stared at the note, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't an invitation. It was a victory lap. It was a cruel, narcissistic display of dominance masquerading as closure, an attempt to cleanse her own guilt by forcing the victim of her betrayal to smile and applaud her happy ending. A slow, dark smile crept across my face for the first time in over a year. She wanted me to show her I had moved on. She wanted my presence at her perfect high society wedding. I picked up my phone, dialed my attorney's number, and then RSVP'd yes. The wedding was held at a restored historical estate just outside of Charlotte, an incredibly lavish venue surrounded by manicured gardens and weeping willows. It was the kind of place Chloe used to gush over in bridal magazines when we were 25 and broke, back when a backyard barbecue felt like a luxury. Julian's newfound venture capital money had clearly spared no expense. I arrived exactly 15 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. I was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, freshly dry cleaned, and a crisp white shirt. I had spent the last 2 weeks preparing, but not in the way Chloe expected. I hadn't spent nights crying or drinking myself to sleep. Instead, I had spent hours working with a private investigator Sarah had recommended, a retired detective who specialized in corporate asset tracking and fraud. As it turned out, Julian's spectacular rise to wealth wasn't quite the fairy tale Chloe believed it to be. The proprietary logistics software his new company was pitching to investors wasn't just built on my casual dinner table complaints. He had actually managed to siphon proprietary data codes from my company's regional server during those long afternoons he spent alone on my couch, using my unsecured home Wi-Fi and a remote mirroring program. He hadn't just stolen my wife, he had stolen corporate intellectual property.
The private investigator had successfully compiled a bulletproof digital footprint, and my company's legal board had spent the last 48 hours quietly preparing a massive federal lawsuit and an emergency injunction to freeze all of Julian's corporate assets. But I didn't want him to get a quiet letter from a lawyer in the mail. I wanted Chloe to see the foundation of her destiny crumble in real time, in front of everyone she wanted to impress. I walked down the stone path toward the outdoor seating area. The air was thick with the scent of expensive floral arrangements and the murmur of high society chatter. As I stepped into the venue, a few mutual friends from our old life spotted me. Their conversations instantly died. Necks craned, eyes widened, and a tense, uncomfortable silence began to ripple through the guests. They looked at me as if I were a ghost, or worse, a desperate ex-husband staging a pathetic scene. I ignored them, keeping a polite, serene smile on my face as I took a seat in the very back row, crossing my legs comfortably.
The music shifted to a grand, traditional processional. The double doors of the estate opened, and Chloe appeared, walking down the aisle on her father's arm. She looked undeniably beautiful in a sweeping lace gown, but when her eyes scanned the crowd and inevitably landed on me, sitting in the back row, she visibly stumbled. Her grip tightened on her father's arm, her smile faltering for a terrifying second before she forced herself to look straight ahead at Julian, who was standing at the altar in a tuxedo, looking like the king of the world. Julian hadn't noticed me yet. His eyes were locked on Chloe, a look of smug, arrogant satisfaction written across his face. He had won the prize. He had taken the steady man's life and turned it into his own paradise. The ceremony was a blur of poetic vows and generic sentimentality. The minister spoke at length about soulmates, about cosmic alignment, and about how true love always finds a way through adversity. I sat through it all without flinching, my expression completely neutral, watching the two people who had destroyed my life commit themselves to a lie. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister announced, and the crowd erupted into applause. Julian leaned in, kissing Chloe deeply, and as they turned around to walk back down the aisle as a married couple, Julian's eyes finally met mine. The smug smile instantly froze on his lips.
His stride hitched, a sudden flash of raw, deep-seated panic darting through his eyes before he recovered his composure, throwing his chest out and pulling Chloe closer to his side as they walked past me. I didn't look away. I just nodded at him, a slow, appreciative gesture, like a spectator acknowledging a good performance. The reception was held in a massive glass pavilion on the estate grounds, illuminated by hundreds of twinkling fairy lights. Waiters in tuxedos carried trays of champagne, and a jazz band played softly in the corner. I mingled near the back, sipping a club soda, waiting for the perfect moment. It didn't take long. After the first dance, Chloe excused herself from Julian to greet a group of her college friends near the bar. I casually adjusted my jacket and walked over, cutting through the crowd until I was standing directly behind her. "Beautiful ceremony, Chloe," I said quietly. She spun around, nearly spilling her champagne. Her friends instantly fell silent, stepping back to give us space, their eyes darting between us in anticipation of a meltdown. "Mark," Chloe whispered, her face tense, her eyes darting around the room to see if Julian was watching. "You actually came. I didn't think you would." "You asked for my blessing," I said, my voice smooth and conversational. "It felt rude to deny you that, especially after everything we went through to get here." She swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure in front of her friends.
Thank you. It means a lot to me that you're trying to be mature about this. I know it was hard, but Julian and we really are happy, Mark. I just wanted you to see that it wasn't personal. Oh, I know it wasn't personal, I smiled, tilting my head. It was just business. Speaking of which, where is the happy groom? I have a wedding present for him. Before she could answer, Julian appeared at her side, stepping between us defensively. His face was flushed from the alcohol, his eyes narrowed as he glared at me. "Mark, you've had your moment. You showed up, everyone saw you being the bigger man. Now I think it's time for you to leave." "I'm just enjoying the party, Julian," I said, putting my hands in my pockets. "The venue is incredible. The catering must have cost a fortune. It's amazing what you can accomplish with stolen capital, isn't it?" Julian's face went completely pale, the color dropping out of his skin just like it had 14 months ago in my bedroom. "I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Get out of here before I have security throw you out."
You can try, I replied, pulling my phone from my pocket and glancing at the time. It was exactly 8:15 p.m., but I think security is going to be a little busy in about 2 minutes. Chloe looked between us, her brow furrowing as she noticed the sudden terror in her new husband's eyes. Julian, what is he talking about?
Nothing, Chloe. He's just trying to cause a scene because he's bitter, Julian hissed, grabbing her arm to pull her away. Let's go. Actually, Julian, I said, raising my voice just enough to catch the attention of the surrounding tables, I think you should check your email, or perhaps your phone. I believe your chief technology officer has been trying to reach you for the last 20 minutes. Right on cue, the heavy double doors of the pavilion opened. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside, accompanied by a local sheriff's deputy. They didn't look like wedding guests. They looked like an execution squad. They scanned the room until they spotted Julian, walking directly toward the head table with absolute purpose. Julian's phone began to vibrate violently in his tuxedo pocket. Then his smartwatch lit up with a barrage of frantic notifications. What is that? Chloe asked, her voice rising in pitch as she saw the dark-suited man approaching. Julian, who are they? The lead man in the suit stopped directly in front of Julian, pulling a thick folder of legal documents from his briefcase. Julian Vance, I'm an officer of the court. You are being formally served with a federal injunction filed by Global Logistics Solutions for corporate espionage, theft of intellectual property, and data fraud. As of 5 minutes ago, an emergency asset freeze order has been executed on all personal and corporate bank accounts tied to your name and your entity.
A collective gasp echoed through the pavilion as the surrounding guests realized what was happening. The music from the jazz band sputtered and stopped entirely. Julian stared at the papers handed to him, his hands trembling so violently the pages rattled. This is a mistake. This is garbage. My lawyers will have this thrown out by Monday. Your lawyers won't be able to retain their fees, Mr. Vance, the man replied coldly. Your corporate servers have already been seized by federal authorities in Atlanta. Have a good evening. Chloe looked at the documents, then at Julian's terrified, sweating face, and finally at me. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The luxury apartment, the high society lifestyle, the perfect wedding, it was all built on a crime that was now crashing down around her ears. Mark, she gasped, her voice breaking as she took a step toward me. What did you do? I didn't do anything, Chloe, I said, leaning in slightly so only the two of them could hear my voice over the stunned silence of the room. You told me it was destiny. I just wanted to make sure destiny was properly documented. The silence in the pavilion was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that swallowed the clinking of champagne glasses and the whispers of 100 high society guests. Chloe stood frozen, her eyes darting from the legal papers in Julian's trembling hands to the stone-faced sheriff's deputy standing just a few feet away.
The fairy lights above us, which had looked so romantic moments before, now cast a harsh, exposing glare over the entire scene. Julian, Chloe whispered, her voice cracked and frantic as she grabbed his sleeve. Julian, look at me. Tell me this is a joke. Tell me he's lying. But Julian couldn't look at her. He was staring at the floor, his chest heaving under his tailored tuxedo, his face an asymmetric mask of shock and computational panic. The smooth, fast-talking entrepreneur who always had an escape hatch was entirely gone. He knew the digital footprint he left on my home router was absolute. He knew that the venture capital backing his entire lifestyle was contingent on clean intellectual property. In a matter of seconds, his carefully constructed empire of cards had been completely obliterated. Ma'am, the deputy said, stepping forward with a calm, imposing professionalism, we need Mr. Vance to step outside into the lobby to sign the acknowledgement of the emergency seizure warrant. We have a federal compliance officer waiting on the line. No, wait, just give us a second, Julian snapped, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched desperation as he finally looked up, his eyes locking onto mine with pure, unadulterated hatred. You did this. You planned this whole thing. You sat there in the back of the room watching us, waiting for this exact moment. I just accepted your invitation, Julian, I said, my voice steady, cool, and entirely conversational.
Chloe explicitly asked me to show her that I had moved on. She wanted me to see your happiness. I merely brought the truth along as a +1. Chloe looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and a sudden, devastating realization. The tears were already spilling over her eyelashes, cutting dark tracks through her perfect bridal makeup. "Mark, please, this is our wedding day. How could you be this cruel? How could you do this to me?" "Cruel?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice so that it carried only to the two of them, though the surrounding crowd was still leaning in, desperate to catch every syllable of the high society meltdown. "You think this is cruel, Chloe? Cruel was coming home early on a rainy Tuesday night to find my best friend in my bed. Cruel was you telling me I was selfish and paranoid for months while you two were laughing behind my back. Cruel was forcing me to sell my home, bankrupting my savings with alimony demands, and leaving me in a one-bedroom apartment while you took a victory lap in a luxury high-rise built on my stolen work." I took a deep breath, looking at her beautiful, expensive lace dress, which now looked like a costume for a tragedy. "I didn't break the law, Chloe. Julian did. I didn't ruin your wedding day. Your choices did. You told me this was destiny. Well, consider this the final chapter." Julian let out a low, guttural curse and took a step toward me, his fists clenching at his sides.
But the deputy immediately moved into his line of sight, placing a heavy, gloved hand on Julian's shoulder. "That's enough, sir. Step outside. Now." With a broken, defeated slump of his shoulders, Julian let the legal folder drop to the floor. The pages scattered across the polished hardwood, drifting over the expensive floral arrangements. He was led out of the pavilion by the two suits and the deputy, his head hanging low, leaving a wake of stunned silence behind him. Chloe watched him go, her hands pressed against her mouth as she let out a ragged, trembling sob. The reality of her situation was settling in with brutal precision. The luxury high-rise apartment uptown was paid for by Julian's corporate accounts that were now completely frozen by a federal judge. The lavish wedding venue, the catering, the jazz band, the checks would bounce by Monday morning, leaving her legally and financially tethered to a man facing federal corporate espionage charges and total financial ruin. The high society friends she had invited to witness her triumph were already whispering into their phones, texting the details of her disgrace to the rest of the city. She turned back to me, her shoulders shaking violently under the weight of her gown. "Mark, please help me. You don't understand. I didn't know about any of the business stuff. I didn't know what he did. Please don't leave me like this."
I looked at her, and for the first time in 14 months, the heavy, suffocating knot of anger in my chest completely dissolved. I didn't feel hatred. I didn't feel a toxic surge of joy at her suffering. I just felt a profound, liberating emptiness. The woman standing before me wasn't the brilliant, effortless girl I had fallen in love with in college. She was just a deeply flawed, opportunistic stranger who had traded loyalty for an illusion of wealth, and now she had to live in the ruins of her own choice. "You have Julian now, Chloe," I said quietly, adjusting the cuffs of my charcoal suit. "You two deserve each other. Have a wonderful marriage." I turned my back on her, walking away from the head table, cutting through the crowd of onlookers who quickly parted to let me through. Nobody spoke to me. Nobody tried to stop me. I could hear Chloe's mother sobbing somewhere in the front rows, and the faint hysterical sound of Chloe calling my name, but I didn't look back. I walked out of the glass pavilion, stepping into the cool, crisp evening air. The sun had completely set, leaving a deep, dark blue sky pinned with stars. I walked down the stone path, past the manicured gardens and the weeping willows, feeling lighter than I had in years. The ghost of the broken man who had sat on the bottom step of a dark, empty house in the pouring rain was finally gone. I reached the parking lot, found my truck, and climbed into the driver's seat. I rolled down the windows, letting the cool night air fill the cabin, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the estate grounds and hit the open highway back toward Charlotte, I finally reached over and turned on the radio. A familiar, upbeat classic rock song filtered through the speakers, and for the first time in a very long time, I found myself smiling, not out of malice, but out of a genuine, beautiful sense of peace. My life was entirely my Leanne, and the future was wide open.